Well, the planetary conjunction that we were talking about peaks this week, so Robert Massey suggests seeing it while you can. And if you do miss it, I've put some pictures. They're just shaky ones from my camera phone, I'm afraid, but they're on my Facebook page. That's Jon Stewart, BBC. This is Science Action from the BBC. Now, voters in political elections are most likely to pick a candidate with a lower voice. That's according to research just published, which could have an impact on how we pick leaders. A lesson for these guys, maybe.
You are not forgotten. We will not leave you behind. Our campaign is on the move, and real change is finally on the way.
This was a big night tonight. Lots of states. We're going to win a few. We're going to lose a few.
We don't have privacy, but we have too much secrecy in government.
It's not that I am a good debater. It is that I articulate the deepest felt values of the American people.
That was Mitt Romney, Rick Santorum, Ron Paul, and Newt Gingrich speaking in the US race for the Republican presidential nomination. So, do you think that you were influenced by the pitch of their voice as much as what they were actually saying? Well, this new work says that it is part of our decision-making process, whether we recognize it or not. Here's Professor Casey Klofstad from the University of Miami in the US.
There's a general impression out there that people with lower pitched voices are, say, more persuasive, more electable. Another thing that we've seen and that motivated our study is if you look at media broadcasters, they also tend to have lower pitched voices than the average person. And that really led us to the question of what is it about this vocal signal that affects our perceptions? That led us to the extant literature on human voice pitch, where indeed we have seen that there is science that shows that lower voice pitch is more attractive in men, for example, is an indicator of social dominance and strength in men and in women as well.
And if we think about Margaret Thatcher in particular, in fact, I remember in that movie that was just released about her life, her getting voice training to have a lower voice.
If I remember the movie correctly, she was perceived to be screechy early in her political
yes,
career.
Exactly.
And this can be a problem with women, especially when they talk loudly. So this is well known. It's just not Margaret Thatcher. Candidates everywhere in the US, UK, everywhere tend to get vocal training to make their voices sound more persuadable, more electable.
So how have you looked into this in a scientific way?
We took each voice and electronically manipulated so there would be a high version and then a low version. And if you want to play those for us.
Yes, so this is the high-pitched version.
I urge you to vote for me this November.
And then the same voice with a lower pitch.
I urge you to vote for me this November.
It's a gap of 40 hertz, but this has been shown in previous studies on voice pitch that this is perceptible and it does make a difference.
And what's important here is that these are not voices that the subjects of your experiments are likely to know already. These aren't actual political candidates.
Correct. There are novel voices, and then another thing to consider is the utterance that they're saying, I urge you to vote for me this November. It's politically relevant. It's putting the listener within the context of an election, and yet it is partisan neutral.
So what is it that people are preferring and therefore effectively voting for in the lower voice? What traits do we associate with that?
The basic finding is that at a rate better than chance, men and women who are listening to these voices prefer to vote for lower-pitched voices for both female and male candidates. Now, what could be driving this is a real question. We did a separate set of experiments where instead of voting, we asked our listeners to say which voice was more competent, which voice was stronger, and which voice was more trustworthy. And we picked those adjectives on purpose because they're well known in the political science literature to be cues that voters look for in prospective candidates. Now, what we found in female voices is that male and female listeners perceived the lower-pitched female voice to be competent, stronger, and more trustworthy. Now, for male voices, the results were different. When men and women were listening to male voices, women did not perceive any difference between the high and the low pitch in terms of competence, strength, and trustworthiness. In contrast, men listening to other men found the lower-pitched voice to be more competent and to be stronger.
Given what you know and the amount of time you must put into listening to different voices, do you find yourself now hearing, for example, the Republican candidates in the US as they're speaking and sort of assessing in your mind which one is more likely to be elected based on voice alone?
Sure. Given what we've been researching, it's hard not to look at the real world and try and apply what we've learned and just sort of giving our impressions. And in fact, thinking about the science, one of our motivations as we move on is to push our research and our findings into the real world. One thing that we've been telling other people is that we really need to be careful in applying this research or extrapolating to it for, say, the 2012 elections. What we did was an experiment in a laboratory based on hypothetical elections. So our motivation is to then push this into the real world and see how voice pitch might affect actual candidates' actual elections.
Well, that study makes me very aware of my own voice. That's Professor Casey Klofstad there with research published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society B. So that is just about enough of the sound of me for now. Science in Action was produced by Anya Liktorovich. I'm John Stewart, and there's more from us at bbcworldservice.com.